This is the X-Zone Broadcast Network, broadcasting worldwide on broadcast affiliates and satellite program providers, including CNN Broadcast Network, Sirius Satellite Network, Star Media, Good News Radio Network, Angel Broadcast Network, Wiki Broadcast Network, and WPBN TV. For more information on the X-Zone Broadcast Network, visit us at www.xzbn.net.
Welcome to another edition of Cal's Corner Radio here on the X-Zone Broadcast Network. My name is Kal Korff, and I'm your host. The executive producer of the show is, of course, the one and only, truly legendary, in my honest opinion, Mr. Rob McConnell. Welcome back. Glad to have you back, and I'm glad to be back. Sorry I was not here recently, but I was working on the movie, The Zeta Reticuli Conspiracy, and was not able to juggle both at the same time. Okay, so let's get caught up on a few things from the last episodes that we've done on this show. First of all, let's talk about Kennedy's assassination real quick. Let's give you a short update on that. Since we last did a dedicated show on that subject, as many people know, the United States government, thanks to the orders by President Donald Trump, has released thousands of more pages of formerly classified files. Trump has ordered all of them to be released unless the security agencies or intelligence agencies like the CIA can show why that material should not be released, and they have to prove their case. Otherwise, the material does become public. And as we said and predicted a few weeks ago here on this show, said very clearly that there is not going to be any evidence that proves or even hints or indicates in any credible fashion that Kennedy was killed as a result of a conspiracy. And I've been saying this since the late 1980s, especially when I appeared on Larry King Live on CNN on November 22nd in 1993. That, of course, was last century, decades ago, on a special show which was the 30th anniversary of that murder. And I said and proved to the satisfaction of, I think, people who think critically and objectively about the subject that the shooter was only Oswald, and that the Warren Commission was ultimately right, even though they didn't have the data at the time to prove their conclusion, and of course were deservedly criticized. Now, before we wrap up Kennedy real quick, I want to explain one little detail that we didn't have time to talk about a few weeks ago on that special Kennedy episode here on the X-Zone Broadcast Network. To make a long story short, I got involved in the subject of Kennedy's assassination quite by accident. I was of course, just 18 months old when Kennedy was killed, and I went to John F. Kennedy High School in Fremont, California. And of course, that high school was named after President Kennedy because he had been killed. So when I was in my freshman year of high school, I hated the English class that I was in because I had to reread books that I didn't like, and I'd already read them, but yet I was forced to read them again. So I made a deal with my teacher, Mr. Thomas. I said, here's the deal. I will read twice as many books, but let me pick them. I will write a book report on all of them, and I'd rather do that than read Bless the Beasts and Children for the 10th time. So he agreed that taking this extra workload was something that would help me as a student and as a person grow and mature. So I ended up reading all kinds of books, and I was interested in the Kennedy assassination off and on. And to save time in my report, I started asking my teachers who killed Kennedy. And what surprised me is that every different teacher gave me a different answer. I would ask one teacher, he'd tell me that Oswald did it. Another teacher would tell me CIA did it. Another one would tell me Johnson did it. Another teacher would tell me that we don't know. Another one would tell me the Mafia did it. And since I don't like man-made mysteries, and I had seen the Zapruder film where the murder itself was captured in graphic detail in that historic film, I began to look around, nose around into the subject, and I ended up co-writing a report that was over 200 pages in length. I turned it into Mr. Thomas, and it was only years later that I found out he never read it, even though he gave an A+ grade on that report. So the report concluded wrongly, and I admit that there was a conspiracy to kill Kennedy, and that there was a photograph taken by Mary Mormon that showed a dark figure on the grassy knoll, who, according to reports at that time, should not have been there. And of course, witnesses at that time, some of them had reported a second shot that had come from the grassy knoll. Now, what I didn't know when the press ran a story about me and my colleague at the time in high school, we had written this report. There was some articles that appeared in the press, including at Stanford University. And what happened is a few days after those articles came out, I got a phone call at the school. It was announced over the intercom system that said, "Kal Korff, please come to the office." Now, at Kennedy High School back then, usually when your name was called to come to the principal's office, it meant that you were suspended. You had done something wrong. This was a little trick or tactic that the school used at the time to try to, I won't say intimidate students, but at least hold them up and use them to set examples of how not to behave. So if somebody was called to the office over the intercom, it was usually, again, because they were suspended. So when my name was called to come down to the principal's office, I thought I was suspended. And I remember very vividly walking down the hallway to the principal's office, wondering what the heck I'd done wrong, since I wasn't a problem student. I was actually one of the top students there. And then I get into the principal's office, and I'm told there's a phone call for me. And then I picked up the phone, and it was an investigator with the House Select Committee on Assassinations, who at that time in Washington, D.C., was reinvestigating Kennedy's murder. And he said and told me that he had read the article in the newspaper. This was in the San Jose Mercury News, which was one of several newspapers that had run stories on the 200-plus page research report that had been co-written. And they said they wanted the data to be sent to them. So we sent it to them, including a copy of the Mary Mormon photograph. And about 6 weeks went by and we heard nothing. I was not happy with that. I kept calling Washington, D.C. The school actually let me use their phone. And I asked for our data, what was the status of it? Were they able to verify our conclusions? And they told me over the phone that the image in the picture was not a human being, that it was actually a scratch on the film. And I knew better. I mean, I wasn't an expert on photo analysis, but I knew enough about it to know that this could not be the explanation for what they said was true. It was actually nonsense. So I got mad and I asked that they send our material back. It did arrive about a week or 10 days later. And keep in mind that this was back in the days where it took 3 to 4 days for mail to get from California, where I lived at the time, to back east in New York or Washington, D.C., what we call snail mail today. And when we got the photo back, there was a scratch on it that was not there when we sent it. And that really bothered me. So believe it or not, it was the treatment by the House Select Committee on Assassinations that bothered me, upset me as a kid, that got me interested, obsessed, if you will, with the Kennedy assassination. And then 16 years later, I finally solved it by using a combination of 3D modeling as putting into a database the top best-selling Kennedy books that constituted most of the market, the vast majority of which were, of course, pro-conspiracy oriented. And I put them into a FileMaker database. I was working for Claris, Apple's software subsidiary at the time. They made the software FileMaker. And I used the database to analyze the claims and was able to prove that most of them were nonsense. And then I was one of the first, or the first, I guess, to do a rough 3D primitive modeling of the Zapruder film. And I'm the person who discovered that the moment that the lapel flipped up in Governor Connolly's suit, the moment that you see in frames 224 and 225 and 226 of the Zapruder film, as we discussed in the show a few weeks ago. And that allowed me to prove that it was indeed one bullet that went through both Kennedy and Connolly. It wasn't magic. It didn't change trajectories in midair. And there was actually no mystery. Then I went to Washington, D.C., saw the magic bullet, Oswald's rifle, and so on, was able to piece a lot of it together. And then I did that famous show on Larry King Live. So that's the background story of how I got interested in Kennedy. It wasn't deliberate. It was just one of those events. And it's very similar to how I ended up writing the book, The Roswell UFO Crash, What They Don't Want You to Know. Again, having solved Roswell years earlier, I never intended to write about that subject, but I ended up writing the best-selling expose book on Roswell to date, even all these years later, and it was by accident. And the short version of that is this story, real quickly. What happened is it was in late 1996. I was talking to my publisher, Prometheus Books in New York, and I asked them what they were doing for Roswell because the anniversary was coming up, the 50th anniversary in 1997 in July. And they told me they didn't have any title to, go ahead and release. And I was horrified at that because I had found out through my contacts with other publishers that all of them were going to exploit Roswell and claim that aliens had crashed and all this other nonsense. And of course, everyone knew about the impending release of the book the day after Roswell by the late Philip Corso. And of course, I knew that that book was not true. So because I had solved Roswell, I'm one of the 4 original Roswell UFO investigators, along with Stanton Friedman and Bill Moore and one other individual who's a very good friend of mine. We were part of the original 4. In fact, it was Bill Moore who got my first Meyer expose book published when I was in high school. I decided that, okay, I'll write the book up. And Prometheus told me that it was late in the year. This was in the fall. And that if I could get the book to them in 4 to 6 weeks, they would publish it. If I could not finish it in that time, they wouldn't. And I understood that. So I went ahead and was between jobs at the time in Seattle. Went ahead and bought a small Macintosh computer. And I went ahead and spent weeks in a basement writing the book up. And I had to smile later when critics looked at the book and said that the book has a very fast pace to it. Well, it has a fast pace because I only had a few weeks to get it done. But the reason that I was able to do the book so quickly is because I knew the research stone cold. And much to my surprise, and I think also the publisher, it went on to become, again, the best-selling expose book on Roswell to date. It's gone in several printings. It was also later picked up by Bantam Dell Random House, updated with a expose chapter on Corso because his book had come out by then, and it was the first to expose Colonel Corso's claims as being fraudulent. And then I debated William Burns, the co-author of Corso's book, on another radio show. The debate was stopped halfway through because William Burns admitted that he hadn't read the book and didn't really know anything about Roswell until he got the contract to essentially co-write the book and put it in some sort of form that would be marketable. So that's the short story of how that happened. Now, let's talk about what we're going to talk about for the rest of the show. Since the last episode of Kal's Corner radio show here, a lot has happened in the world across the different subjects. We're going to cover that. After the commercial break, we'll talk about this incredible announcement, this official religious proclamation from the chief religious leader, the Grand Mufti of Saudi Arabia, who has now said that Jews are no longer enemies of Islam, that it is wrong to attack them, and the Saudis have now declared the terrorist group Hamas to be what it always has been, a terrorist group. If this decision holds and it is enforced, and this Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman becomes the next leader of Saudi Arabia in the next week or two especially, which is the rumor, this is a real game changer for history and especially the Middle East, because this essentially isolates Iran as being the last holdout that continues to chant the mantra of death to America and death to Jews. Islam itself has been schizophrenic for over 1,400 years because there's been an internal war between the Shias and the Sunnis, each of which claim to follow the true path of Islam, and they consider each other to be heretics. So what we'll do is talk about that in a moment after the commercial break, and then we'll get into some other worldwide developments in Europe and Africa, as well as in the United States.
Did you know that when you're on the road with limited data or Wi-Fi, you can still listen to the X-Zone Radio Show with Rob McConnell, The Science of Magic with Gwilda Wiyaka, X-1, Dimension X, Space Patrol, and every minute of the X-Zone Broadcast Network by calling 213-401-0080, courtesy of Audio Now. No smartphone, app, or internet needed. It saves your data plan and it's free if you have unlimited minutes. Call 213-401-0080 to listen on any phone, anytime, anywhere. Remember 213-401-0080 for the best of the paranormal, parapsychology, and sci-fi radio programming anywhere, 24/7, 365.
This is the X-Zone Broadcast Network, broadcasting worldwide on broadcast affiliates and satellite program providers, including CNN Broadcast Network, Sirius Satellite Network, Star Media, Good News Radio Network, Angel Broadcast Network, Wiki Broadcast Network, and WPBN TV. For more information on the X-Zone Broadcast Network, visit us at www.xzbn.net.
Welcome back to the second segment of Kal's Corner Radio Show here on the X-Zone Broadcast Network. My name is Kal Korff, and I'm your host. And our executive producer, again, of this show is the one and only Rob McConnell. Now, folks, as we were saying, or as I was saying at the end of the first break here, there's been an amazing development in the Middle East. Hopefully, it is a sign of things to come, meaning hopefully more of the same type of change will occur. Basically, what has happened is that the chief religious leader, this is the Grand Mufti of Saudi Arabia, this is their version of the Pope, essentially, has made an official declaration. He did this on a media show in Saudi Arabia. He declared two things of note. One is that Jews are no longer the eternal enemies of Islam. While everyone with an IQ of over 5 has always known that, to be blunt, the fact that he is now saying that, and also that it is wrong to persecute Jews and try to kill them like a lot of radical Muslims have done for centuries, is a huge breakthrough. He has also declared, the state of Saudi Arabia, the country of Saudi Arabia has declared that Hamas is a terrorist group. And while that's always been obvious, again, to anyone with an IQ of over 5, the idea that the Saudis would come forth and give them that official declaration and issue a religious decree that it is un-Islamic to both prosecute Jews, declare them to be enemies, try to harm them, as well as support Hamas or any groups like it, is a real game changer. Now, what has to happen is the development of real tangible acts as a consequence of this. In other words, it's one thing for a religious figure to make a declaration. It is another issue entirely to see tangible results occur as a consequence of that. In other words, you can say, I'm going to go on a diet all you want, but until you actually do it and start to lose weight, it's just words. So while Israel is ecstatic, of course, that this has happened, and the Middle East is trying to figure out what this is all about, let me give you the short version in the segment here of what's really going on in Saudi Arabia. And as you know, for those of you who listen to this show, I was in the Middle East fairly recently, a while back in August and September. I was in the United Arab Emirates, and that, of course, is a neighboring country to Saudi Arabia. And I did have some discussions while I was there with people about the Saudis. In particular, I was at a newspaper talking to some of the people there. And let me give you the short version of what's going on. If you ever go to the United Arab Emirates, and I would encourage everyone to at least visit there one time, it's a wonderful country. It is, of course, the crown jewel in the Middle East, other than Israel, that has its act very much together. If you look at the quality of life in Dubai, in Abu Dhabi, in that country overall, it is higher than it is in the United States. And it's a lot cheaper, too. In other words, everything just works there. Now, I live in India, okay? It is the world's largest democracy. But to be blunt about it, it's also the world's largest corrupt democracy. And it is also the world's largest superstitious nation. In India, hundreds of millions of people here still worship cows as if they're literal gods. And while everyone has the right to do that, I'm not judging it, I just don't agree with it. The fact is that cows in India have more rights than women do, for all practical purposes. And of course, cows wander everywhere in India. They're a big hazard on the road. I've been in a few accidents in taxis where we've hit cows or at least grazed their horns. And it makes no sense to put these animals in jeopardy to let them wander everywhere, but that's what they do in India. So, what is holding Indian development back as a nation is that nationwide they are their own worst enemy. They'll claim, oh, we're a poor country, we can't afford it. That's not true. India is a black money country, and if all that black money were put to the right purposes and corruption were routed out, they would be and are one of the richest countries in the world. Now, India, and I'll explain why I'm mentioning them briefly, tie it back to the issue of Saudi Arabia, has, on the good side of it, the greatest potential of any of the developing countries. And let me explain briefly why. First of all, it's going to pass communist China in population. China is now having a population crisis in that there is a rapidly growing portion of its population which are senior citizens. And of course, the communist Chinese forcibly imposed a limit of one child per family going back decades. And decades down the road, they're now running up short on young generations of people who can take care of elderly people who are, of course, living longer nowadays thanks to advances in the standards of living and medical technology. And India not only will pass China population-wise, it also will do so eventually economically, or at least draw very close. India is the fastest growing economy in the world for many years now, especially in Asia. In India, if they don't grow 8 to 12% a year, they panic. In the United States, under Barack Obama, growth was anemic during the 8 years that Obama was in office. And I understand he inherited a mess, let's be honest about that, from George Bush, economics-wise. And the growth was a stagnant 2%, okay? And now it's growing more under Trump, but let's be honest about that. That's because of many right things that were done by the Obama administration. Trump inherited an economy that was in much better shape than, of course, Obama did, thanks to George Bush. One problem with the United States, however, is that under George Bush, its deficit was $10 trillion. Under Obama, it has doubled to $20 trillion now. And while the United States remains the world's only superpower, it is also technically broke. Its debt is greater than its gross domestic product, and that is a recipe for disaster. Unfortunately, under Obama, and Obama does bear some responsibility for this, absolutely, although not all of it, about half of the American people now live at or below the poverty level. And the fact is, and this report came out a few days ago, actually late last week, 1% of the world's richest people, 1%, own half the world's wealth. And that is a recipe for disaster and implosion globally. And it's inevitable that the human race is going to pay the price for that. And of course, it won't affect the elite the way it will affect ordinary people like you and I. But there is a disaster coming. The physics are there. The math is there. It is inevitable. So getting back to India, India has, on the plus side, the largest young population in the world. It has the largest portion of young people who are under age 30. And it ultimately does come down to the issue of babies, countries that have the largest populations and can turn and make the right decisions economically to harvest a huge middle class. The size of India's middle class is greater than the entire population of the United States. If they do the right things, they will win. It's all about babies. It is inevitable. In fact, even terrorists know this. The late Yasser Arafat, who was, of course, one of the greatest terrorists in modern history, he used to tell the Israelis all the time that we will eventually win because you don't have as many babies as we do. So China has to make some key changes or it will have severe problems. It views India as an existential threat. And what is going on with India and China has eerie parallels to what is going on in the Middle East was Saudi Arabia. And this is why I'm mentioning the two different parts of the world. In Asia, China uses the country of Pakistan as a proxy to try to open up a second war front against India. It also plays the same double dirty game with communist North Korea. It doesn't care about people's rights or freedoms. In fact, the application Skype now has been banned in China because the Chinese don't value freedom. They never have, at least as long as they've been communist. No communist country in the history of this world has ever valued genuine freedom and democracy. So what is happening in the Middle East is, ever since the Iranian Revolution in 1979, the Middle East has pretty much been schizophrenic in that people have been forced to either accept a radical ideology of death to America, death to Israel, or they have tried to resist that, and of course they often get killed. So people have often complained for decades now, where is there a moderate Middle East? Well, the United Arab Emirates, again, is the crown jewel of the Middle East in the Arab side of things in the Muslim world. Again, if you go to Dubai or Abu Dhabi, not only are things inexpensive, everything just works. And that's not the case in India, and it's not going to be for decades, unfortunately, and there's no excuse for that. The quality of life there is very high. In India, when the sun goes down, women pretty much get off the streets. They don't view it as safe. When I was in the United Arab Emirates, I was driven around in a taxi by a female taxi driver in this Arab country. And I asked her, how long have you been driving a taxi? And she told me for 7 years, and she loved it. I asked her if she felt safe. She said yes. And the United Arab Emirates was awarded recently this year as being the safest country in the world. So they're doing a lot of things right. I saw not only a lot of women out till 5 in the morning, dressed scantily. I even saw bikinis, first bikinis I'd seen in 7 years. Haven't seen a single bikini in India since I've lived here, even though they have incredibly hot weather. And I could even get alcohol, and I could eat beef and not go to prison because it's not India. So one of the first things I did when I went to Abu Dhabi recently is I had a Burger King triple Whopper with cheese, no onions, and I loved it because I haven't had it in 7 years. Because in India, I'd go to prison because 23 out of 29 states have banned the sale of beef. So one of India's problems is that claims to be it's a tolerant secular society, but yet it passes laws for religious reasons. And you can't have it both ways. And one of India's problems is that it's trying to take stuck in the loop Stone Age thinking and is trying to push that on people while also trying to modernize, and both cannot coexist. When you literally think that a statue made in a factory has magical powers, you can't develop your culture as a secular, modern, democratic society when you believe in superstitious nonsense. Because we all know, it's common sense, that a factory made in a statue by people, just by that very dynamic, cannot have magical powers. So the reason that the United Arab Emirates has been a huge success is because it has been able to walk that fine line between having Sharia law, but also allowing people to have just enough Western freedoms so that Western companies, tourists from the West, tourists from Europe, non-Muslims will gladly spend their money there, gladly go to the discos, gladly go party, gladly go have a great time. And they're doing a lot of right things. And their neighbor is Saudi Arabia, one of the most conservative, stubborn, staunch Islamic countries in the history of the religion. Their official version of Islam is called Wahhabism or Wahhabism, depending on how you pronounce it. And the Wahhabis account for about 5% of all the Muslims in the world. It is considered, to use an analogy, to be redneck Islam. The Wahhabi doctrine says that you cannot be friends with someone who is not a Wahhabi. That it is your job to either convert people to their version of Islam or be killed. And that's exactly historically what the Wahhabis have done. Ibn Saud, who formed Saudi Arabia, aligned with the radical Wahhabs to go ahead and conquer land. Now we'll be back in a moment after this commercial break, and we'll continue to tell you why their sudden reversal of course is extremely important and has literally global ramifications.
This is the X-Zone Broadcast Network, broadcasting worldwide on broadcast affiliates and satellite program providers, including CNN Broadcast Network, Sirius Satellite Network, Star Media, Good News Radio Network, Angel Broadcast Network, Wiki Broadcast Network, and WPBN TV. For more information on the X-Zone Broadcast Network, visit us at www.xzbn.net.
Did you know that when you're on the road with limited data or Wi-Fi, you can still listen to the X-Zone Radio Show with Rob McConnell, The Science of Magic with Gwilda Wiyaka, X-1, Dimension X, Space Patrol, and every minute of the X-Zone Broadcast Network by calling 213-401-0080, courtesy of Audio Now. No smartphone, app, or internet needed. It saves your data plan and it's free if you have unlimited minutes. Call 213-401-0080 to listen on any phone, anytime, anywhere. Remember 213-401-0080 for the best of the paranormal, parapsychology, and sci-fi radio programming anywhere, 24/7, 365.
Welcome back to segment 3 of Cal's Corner Radio Show. My name is Kal Korff, and I'm your host. And welcome back to the X-Zone Broadcast Network. So, as we were saying in the previous segment, there's been a huge announcement recently by the top religious leader in Saudi Arabia, the Grand Mufti. He has again declared formally on a media show there in that country that Jews are no longer the enemies, that it is wrong to try to kill them, prosecute them, and he's also said that the terrorist group Hamas is a terrorist group. Now, the reason this is literally a game changer globally is because this essentially isolates Saudi Arabia's regional, economic, political, and ideological rival, Iran, as being the last holdout country to say death to America, death to the Jews. And while the Saudis have been longtime allies of the United States, going back essentially to World War II when President Roosevelt visited that country and cut a deal for oil, they've also been allies of the British, who of course helped the Saudis get into power in exchange for oil. The reason this is significant is because this is going to separate the men from the boys, so to speak, in the Middle East. So in Saudi Arabia, they have, like India, a large population of young people under 30. There are millions of them, of course, and they're going to need jobs over the next few years. And with the price of oil having tanked over the last years, the United States briefly was the top producer of oil, surpassing Saudi Arabia thanks to fracking technology, which of course the Saudis can't exploit because they don't have oil in that form. The United States does. Under the Obama administration, America became the largest nation using fracking technology, and that's rather ironic that under Obama, who was the Mr. Green president supposedly, that we became the largest producer of fossil fuels. There's some irony in there, but it's a fact. So what has happened is the Saudis need to find a way to plan for the future or they're in serious trouble. And what has happened over the decades, while the Saudis have struggled with their own extremist ideology known as Wahhabism, you have to remember that 15 of the 19 hijackers that caused the terrorist attacks of 9/11 on September 2001, that they were Wahhabis, they were Saudis, and that caused not only problems in the relationship with Saudi Arabia from the United States, but it caused an internal struggle within the Saudi royal elite themselves as to where they were ultimately going to ideologically be. And what has happened is ever since King Salman took over the throne last year, his son, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, has not only seized the critical portfolios that give him essentially all the power and the blessings from his father, but recently there were dozens, actually hundreds of elite, wealthy Saudi upper elites that were arrested, and they have been held in a ritzy hotel, and they have been charged with corruption. And of course, everybody knew they were corrupt. Even the head of the bin Laden construction company, as in the parents or senior members of the bin Laden family. Their son, of course, was the world famous co-founder and terrorist of Al Qaeda, who, of course, was killed years ago in Pakistan by a secret CIA Navy SEAL operation. And what happened is these people were charged with corruption. Some nearly 2,000 bank accounts have been frozen. And the timing of this is not a coincidence, because what Crown Prince Salman is doing is he is sidelining or removing all of those who could oppose him, because there are rumors and even leaks in the media. The British press has carried the story that the king of Saudi Arabia, his father, will step aside very soon and essentially switch his role from running affairs on a day-to-day basis to follow more of the Queen Elizabeth example in Great Britain and be more of a titular figurehead. And since he's 83 years old, his best days or prime days are, of course, far behind him. Yet his son, who is in his early 30s, he's, of course, got his whole life ahead of him, assuming he doesn't get harmed. So what has happened is there's been a coup inside Saudi Arabia. And Crown Prince Salman is, of course, very close to the young royals that run the neighboring country, the United Arab Emirates. And what Crown Prince Salman has announced is that they're going to take an area of their country, of Saudi Arabia, about 300 miles in size, area a little bit bigger than the entire country of Egypt, believe it or not. And they're going to spend $600 billion to develop what is essentially a copy and paste job of the United Arab Emirates and Dubai. They have already announced that not only will this be a high-tech investment park, but that the restrictive rules of the rest of Saudi Arabia will no longer apply. They have specifically said that women will be able to roam around freely. Gee, that's mighty generous of them. They'll even be able to wear bikinis and actually share the same swimming pool or hot tubs with their male counterparts. People will be able to drink alcohol. They'll be able to party. They'll be able to act totally Western and arguably a bit decadent. And this will be in the middle, or at least on the coast, of a tourist area and a business development high-tech area that the Saudis are setting aside that is literally going to be the biggest in the world. Now, the question becomes, how does the Saudis pay for this when they have a deficit of several $billion dollars and the price of oil is not going to go up for the foreseeable future? In other words, when the Saudis used to project what they were going to do and what they're going to spend things on, they always assumed that there was a sweet spot price of $100 a barrel for oil. The price of oil has dropped to 5 times less than that amount. So how are they going to pay for this? Well, as I wrote in a article that was published last week, I think it was, or maybe the week before, the way you pay for it is you confiscate the wealth of your opponents. In other words, you pull a long-time historical trick out of what previous regimes have done with their opponents when they've been run by dictatorships. And let's be honest, Saudi Arabia is a dictatorship. It has a king. Whatever he says, that is the law. You can't argue with it. You have no right to protest it or overturn that judgment. It is not a coincidence that the people they have arrested, these couple hundred people, have been told to cough up money. They have been told that if they surrender 70% of their wealth, they can go free. And it turns out that if you do the math, it's about $600 billion. What an amazing not coincidence. So that's how the Saudis are going to pay for it. They're going to use their rivals, their enemies, to foot the bill to transition the nation into being a more moderate and, as Crown Prince Salman says, a tolerant form of Islam that will welcome all religions. Now that, again, is a game-changing statement. But until the first Jewish synagogue or Christian churches are built in decent numbers in Saudi Arabia, they're just words. And the world has yet to see whether this will actually come to fruition. It's very early in the game. The Saudis have even officially said that they will pay Israel billions of dollars if they'll help in a war to defeat Hezbollah, the terrorist group that is a front for Iran. And this is actually one of the key things that is driving this in process so far, seeming transformation of Saudi Arabia. They look at what the United Arab Emirates has done. They're like, gee, why didn't we think of that? When you're in the UAE, you'd never know you were in the most hostile region of the world, known as the chaotic Middle East. It again is so wonderful there. It's one of my favorite places to go. And it's not expensive. There are many things that are tax-free, and they really have their act together. It's a wonderful country. And so what has happened is, since the Iranian Revolution took over and Ayatollah Khamenei took power in 1979, Iran has slowly and systematically, despite all these sanctions that have been against it for decades, lifted only just recently after the nuclear deal was struck with the P5+1 group of nations led by the United States, this so-called Iran nuclear deal. Iran has, of course, expanded vastly in the Middle East. They control almost all of Iraq now. That's an ironic byproduct of George Bush's invasion of Iraq to depose Saddam Hussein. The only area of Iraq that is not under complete Iranian control or influence is the area that the Kurds control. The Kurds are the last standouts or hope or bridge against Iran taking over that country. They also control much of what goes on in Lebanon. They control much of what goes on in Syria. And the Saudis and the Iranians have been fighting a proxy war in Yemen. The Iranians back the Houthis, and of course the Saudis have been trying to stop them, and Crown Prince Salman has been leading that charge. To show you how this is shaping up, we are clearly seeing the formation of a coalition between Israel, the United States, with Trump's full endorsement, he's been very open about that, and the Saudis, to align to try to stop Iran from expanding further. Iran, of course, continues to fight against the Saudis, and there is a proxy war that's going on, and it's more than just about regional control. It has to do ultimately with fundamental religious ideology. You have to remember that the Iranians are Shia Muslims, the Saudis are Sunni Muslims, and they've been gleefully killing each other for over 1,400 years because each side considers the other to be false Muslims or heretics, if you will, because each side is claiming that their version of Islam is the only true path to Islam. And that schism goes back after Muhammad died, and there was a split between the followers of Muhammad as far as which way to take the direction of the religion. So there is a religious core that is going on at the heart of this, and as Hezbollah has constantly prepared for war over the years since the last conflict they fought against Israel, it is a matter of time, unless Hezbollah stands down, before there will be a conflict. Only this time it'll be a bit different. It may not be just Israel fighting against Hezbollah. It may be, again, the Saudis. And this can get very heated and actually quite scary quickly, because Iran has at least 1,000 ballistic missiles that, of course, can rain down a lot of destruction on Saudi Arabia as well as Israel. Israel is a nuclear power. It's just not officially declared. But nuclear weapons are pretty much useless in conventional warfare because you can't control how the radioactive fallout is going to work. Therefore, they're a deterrent up to a point. But let's use a very real example here. The United States is a nuclear power as well, a superpower. But that didn't stop the 19 hijackers from carrying out the terrorist attacks on 9/11. In fact, nuclear weapons were irrelevant. So Saudi Arabia is buying $330 billion worth of weapons from the United States. It is the single largest weapon sale in the history of America. They're taking $110 billion of that up front. And of course, that was one of the consequences of the nuclear deal with Iran. The Saudis were very clear that if Obama cut that deal, and he did, that it would lead to the nuclearization and the arms race in the Middle East, and that is exactly what is happening. So we'll be back for the final segment of Cal's Corner Radio Show after the break here, and then we'll wrap this up.
The Earth is under ever-increasing pressure from untenable lifestyles and growing populations. Yet, viable answers seem in short supply. What if I told you there's an ancient form that can empower you to take charge of your life? What if your entire family could be enfolded and supported by life itself, finding safe passage through challenging times? I'm Gwilda Wiyaka, founder and director of Path Home Shamanic Art School, with great news: an upcoming series of leading-edge online affordable classes based in an ancient form of shamanism, easily learned and used by your entire family. Galactic Shamanism, Art of the Ancients, Key to Tomorrow are a series of online adult and children's lessons instructing your entire family on natural law, how to cooperate with and be supported by the powers of the universe. Visit findyourpathhome.com to find these unique and powerful classes.
This is the X-Zone Broadcast Network, broadcasting worldwide on broadcast affiliates and satellite program providers, including CNN Broadcast Network, Sirius Satellite Network, Star Media, Good News Radio Network, Angel Broadcast Network, Wiki Broadcast Network, and WPBN TV. For more information on the X-Zone Broadcast Network, visit us at www.xzbn.net.
Did you know that when you're on the road with limited data or Wi-Fi, you can still listen to the X-Zone Radio Show with Rob McConnell, The Science of Magic with Gwilda Wiyaka, X-1, Dimension X, Space Patrol, and every minute of the X-Zone Broadcast Network by calling 213-401-0080, courtesy of Audio Now. No smartphone, app, or internet needed. It saves your data plan, and it's free if you have unlimited minutes. Call 213-401-0080 to listen on any phone, anytime, anywhere. Remember 213-401-0080 for the best of the paranormal, parapsychology, and sci-fi radio programming anywhere, 24/7, 365.
Welcome back to the final segment of Cal's Corner Radio Show here on the X-Zone Broadcast Network. My name is Kal Korff, and I'm your host, and our executive producer here is, of course, Rob McConnell. So, to make a long story short, the Saudis are now denouncing their previous form of radical Islam. Keep in mind, this is a country where women are not allowed to drive. They have to go outside as long as they're accompanied by a male relative, and a bunch of other oppressive nonsense that goes on in that country. They're now trying to walk away from that, change society, become more moderate and tolerant, and of course they've announced some very ambitious plans to try to realize that vision. And the proof is going to be in the execution of this, as in the tangible deliverables. You know, I often have this debate with people in social media about words. I keep trying to remind especially left-wing liberal Democrats that words mean nothing, absolutely nothing, unless they're backed up by tangible actions. To use an analogy, a husband can say, "I love you, honey," but if he's cheating on his wife, it doesn't mean anything. The words are empty. And this is really what's going to happen with Saudi Arabia. Now that their top religious figure has said and commanded Muslims to consider Jews to be no longer enemies, and that Hamas is a terrorist group and must be eliminated, it's on the followers of Islam and people who accept what this religious edict means to deliver the goods and go ahead and change their behavior. Because again, you have a schism in the Muslim world between Shia and Sunni Muslims. To use a rough analogy, It's roughly their equivalent of what happened in Christianity centuries ago between the Protestants and the Catholics. We have to remember that in what was called the 30 Years' War in Europe, about 1/3 of Europe was wiped out because the Catholics and the Protestants were killing each other, all in the name of God, quote unquote. And this is one of the reasons today that the Czech Republic, or the newly crowned country that has changed its name to Czechia, has said that this is the main reason why Czechs today are largely atheists, because the 30 Years' War started and essentially ended in that country. And they've seen what religious extremism can do. It kills a lot of people. It is full of hatred and intolerance, and this has historically been true. Because extremism is extremism, period. What religion it might belong to is just a detail. So this is what's happening. And now terrorist groups who follow these ideologies have some serious thinking to do. What are they going to do? Are the Sunni terrorist groups going to suddenly follow Iran, their Shias, even though they're supposed to be the enemy? So this decision by Saudi Arabia is a game changer. Hamas no longer has a patron in the Saudis, at least not officially. If somebody is still bankrolling some of them, they're a rogue sponsor, not an official sponsor. And then you have terrorist groups like the Islamic State, who are Sunni, and of course Al-Qaeda, who are Sunni, and the Taliban, who are more or less Sunni. They're not Shia. So what are they going to do? If the main home of Sunni Islam, Saudi Arabia, is saying, don't do this anymore, they're going to have to make a decision. Either they're going to switch to their Shias, brothers, so to speak, or they're going to have to change, or they're going to remain an outlaw within their own religion, as opposed to being, praised like they have been by millions of Muslims around the world. And let's be clear, most people who practice Islam are not terrorists. Absolutely, that's true. Most of them are not radical. Most of them are moderate. They don't want to hurt people. They want to live an ordinary life. But there are just enough of them, lots of them actually, that do practice violence and intolerance and hatred, and their objective is to destroy or forcibly convert the entire world to their particular twisted form of Islam. And let's be honest, throughout history, the Christians used to do the same thing. We have to remember that when the Crusades invaded Jerusalem, they killed Christians as well. They were not, tolerant people. And they certainly were not doing it in the name of God like they had claimed. So the Middle East is transforming. Whether this will actually happen and end up being something tangible and positive for the world, that has yet to be determined. Now let's switch our geographic area here and talk about Europe real quick, because there is a crisis now in Germany, and Germany is considered to be one of the stable pillars, if you will, of the European Union. It is certainly the continent's most powerful economy, along with Great Britain. Well, it turns out that the recently re-elected Chancellor, Angela Merkel, she can't form a government, even though she won the election. And she entered office battered and bruised because she was considered to be the less of two terrible candidates. A lot of people don't want her in office. And now she can't form a coalition, so now she is called for a new election. And depending on the outcome of this poll, she's either going to emerge strong enough to finally form a government, or she may be out of power entirely. And this is predictable, because what has happened is it was Angela Merkel who deliberately mismanaged the huge influx of Muslim immigrants into Germany. Some 1.2 million of them came in. And of course, the Germans were not prepared for this. And a lot of Germans did not like this because Germany is not a Muslim country. It has a huge number of Turks in it, and they have had issues socially with most Germans, or many Germans at least. Germany is, of course, a secular democracy, and if there is any religion that it can claim ownership of, or at least adherence to, it would be Christianity, not Islam. So what happened is, for years, Merkel had said that there was no room for Muslims in Germany. And while that literally wasn't true, she then did an about-face, opened the floodgates, and 1.2 million of them came in, and it was totally mismanaged. And that's rather ironic for the Germans, because German society prides itself, and one of its foundational principles is called Ordnung, which means order. nobody questions the wonderful engineering that Germans make and invent and market in their products. Mercedes-Benz is just one of many examples. German society is very orderly, and it tends not to be chaotic. Even though there were 2 world wars that were fought because of Germans' mentality. So here you had a country that was very organized, has a huge, wonderful social infrastructure, actually supports the unions rather than condemns them like many businesses do in the United States. And then all of a sudden these immigrants come in, the whole program was mismanaged, and the terrorist group, the Islamic State, had openly announced that they had infiltrated some of the ranks of these war refugees and that they had planted terrorists in there. And of course, we know from later attacks that occurred that some of the so-called war refugees were really terrorists who snuck in there, and they committed acts of terror in Great Britain, in Brussels, in France, and of course, Germany. So Merkel is paying the price for, let's be blunt, being stupid in the way she handled or mishandled that crisis. And her political problems now run a bit deeper. For the first time in decades, Germany now has radical far-right members in its parliament. They have called for her to resign. And just as what has happened in France, the far-right political parties have seen a resurgence. And this is what happens historically when the so-called mainstream parties refuse to get their act together. In fact, one can argue that the very reason that American President Donald Trump is in the White House instead of Hillary Clinton is because the main parties, the Democrats and the Republicans, didn't have their act together and refused to grow up and figure out what they want to be when they do finally grow up. You can say, well, that's not quite true because Trump is a Republican. Yeah, he's a Republican because he had to declare himself to be something, but he's really an outsider. You have to remember that the Republican Party itself resisted and tried to stop Trump from being the victor. But they couldn't stop him because he beat his opponents, his second place opponent, Ted Cruz, by about a margin of 2-1. So there's no way to stop him, even though the Republican elites didn't want Trump to get the nomination. We now know, because of the testimony of the former chair of the Democratic National Party, Donna Brazile, as well as leaks from WikiLeaks, that Hillary Clinton conspired with the Democratic Party leadership to essentially rig their election against Bernie Sanders. And the whole reason the Sanders campaign was so successful that almost 100% of his donors were from individuals donating small amounts of money is because he was an outsider as well, really an independent that had decided to run against Hillary on the Democratic ticket. So the message that American voters were sending to the lamestream Democrats and Republicans is that they're essentially tired of the two-party system. And let's be honest, folks, America is 241 years old. Regardless of what country it is, when you only have 2 viable political parties to show for your existence after 241 years, that is not the definition of a living, breathing, dynamic democracy. Instead, it means you are stuck in your ways, stuck in backwards thinking, and you're fossilized. And yes, America is more polarized now than it has been since the time of the Civil War, over 100 years ago. And this is what's happening in Europe. A lot of Europeans do not like the decisions being made on their behalf by bureaucrats that they don't really elect in the European Union who live in their ivory towers. Instead, they are considering radical alternatives because they're willing to try new things, even if they're dangerous, because they're tired of the liberal Democrats, the social Democrats, or the Green Party, whatever these guys call themselves. And this is a danger which is starting to engulf different European nations, and it will only get worse as long as the establishment continues to fail the people. Thanks for joining me for this episode of Kal's Corner Radio here on the X Zone Broadcast Network. We'll be back again next week.